Steven, how did you this up? So it wasn't the stalker romance part that bothered me. It was mostly the writing. I love it so much. It is amazing. You have to read it. Okay. Hello, book friends. Welcome back to Books and Tea Time. I am Addie, and today we are going to be doing one of my favorite videos to film every single year, and that is my best and worst books of the year. This video is so much fun to film every year because I love just going back and looking at all the things that I've read and trying to find like those polar opposites and going through them with you all. I think it's so much fun. But usually in the past like 3 years when I've done this, I do a top 5 best and a top 5 like worst, or like a bottom 5, I guess, if you will. But this year I was having so much trouble narrowing down my top 5. So we have 10 best books and then 5 worst books. He was chewing on a ball of yarn. That's what that horrible sound is. Anyway, so I'm gonna try and do this as quickly as possible because it is Christmas Eve, which is why I have my fun, ugly sweater on. It says Sandy Claus. But I have to be at my parents' house for Christmas Eve festivities in like an hour. So we're gonna try and do this quickly because honestly, a lot of these like best books I kind of already talked about in my like mid-year freakout tag. So like some of them are definitely new and some of them are surprises, but a good bit of them I've already talked about. And I've actually already talked about a couple of the worst ones as well in other videos. So even though I haven't been recording quite a lot this year, the videos that I have recorded, most of these books are mentioned at some point. So without further ado, let's just go through and start talking about these books. I also think I might make a separate video with like my stats for the year, with like all of the information that I track for myself, and also just like give you a rundown of what I read in every month in a quick star rating, just so you can kind of see what I read and what I liked, because even though I only have 10 best books, I read a lot of really good books this year. Let's start with the trash. Let's get the worst books out of the way because I do like having a worst books of the year because it's pretty rare that I give a book like a 1 or a 2 star, just because like, I don't know, I'm very generous with my ratings because I always feel bad. I'm like, okay, maybe this wasn't for me, but it's for somebody else. And honestly, a lot of these books are in that category. Like, these aren't all absolutely trash. It's like either it was disappointing or it was bad. So like I don't really have like a disappointments video that I'm gonna do. I kind of just lump them together in this list because usually I don't read a book unless I think it's going to be pretty good, because I don't like to waste my time with it. But because I'm in so many book clubs at work, and also just like reading things that I see like on TikTok and stuff, it does happen sometimes. So without further ado, I have my laptop here and just like a document with all of my information here. So we're gonna go like from like number 5, which is like the least worst, to number 1, which is the worst. So I don't know, ascending order, I don't know. This first one I am probably gonna get a lot of hate for, and I wanna preface this by saying this is a book that was not for me. It was a disappointment, not a bad book. And that is Invisible Life of Addie LaRue by V.E. Schwab. Okay, I read this for a book club, and honestly, I was just bored. I think that the issue that I had with this book is that like it kind of, I mean, this is a very popular book. I'm probably not going to give synopses for a lot of these, but there's 2 timelines in this book, and I really liked the timelines from the past where we're seeing all of these like past lives that Addie LaRue has lived. Basically, she makes a deal with a devil or like a god figure, and she is immortal, but the caveat is that everybody that she meets immediately forgets her after they don't like see her anymore. And like the present timeline you're following is someone who finally remembers her and like, oh, why does he remember me, and like all that stuff. And I just like wasn't crazy about the present timeline. There could have been more done with like the god figure whose name I don't even really remember. I don't know, it really wasn't for me. Just the pacing, the 2 plots, I just feel like I struggled to enjoy either of them. I did listen to it audibly. I don't know if that really like changes my experience. I listened to it on an airplane as well, and I'm not super great at flying, so maybe it was that. But I mean, this book is so beloved, and it's just like I don't know, it just wasn't for me. It's also like terrible. 2 books on this list, my worst books, my name is in the title, literally. Like, this is the first one. My legal name isn't Addie, but like it's what I go by, and so I was like, oh, a character with my name, and I just did not like it at all. It wasn't like because it was weird to hear my name. I don't know. I didn't like it, and I'm so sorry, but it's true. I didn't. It was a letdown. Okay, I wanted it to be a 4 or a 5 star, but I think I gave it like a 3. I don't know, like it wasn't terrible. I definitely understand why a lot of people like it. This next one is a very, very similar situation, and I got very similar vibes from both of these books. So if you like Addie LaRue, you're probably gonna like this book. But the second book on my like disappointing scale of the worst books of the year is The Starless Sea by Erin Morgenstern. I really liked the beginning of this book. I thought that the beginning was strong when you've got like this like mystery kind of thing. This guy finds a book where the first chapter is literally a moment from his past, from his childhood, and there's like this underground library called the Starless Sea. I guess it's underground. I don't really remember all of the details, but I think my biggest issue with this book is I wanted so much more time being in the Starless Sea when it was this populated, massive, like, hub of worlds converging together. Like, a lot of the book is like, oh, the Starless Sea used to be XYZ, and you get like glimpses of that, but it's like a barren wasteland now. And I feel like if this book was a series and like you started at that early point and then it like flashes forward, like I just feel like there could have been a lot more done with this place. But the ending wasn't great, and like after like the 150 page mark, it really just like kind of went downhill from there in terms of like the momentum of the story. But again, I know people love Erin Morgenstern, and The Night Circus gets so much love and so much hype, and it was on my TBR, but like I kind of don't want to read it anymore because I did not have a fun time with this book. This was another one that I read for a book club, and everybody in the book club didn't like it either, so I do feel a little bit justified. I think if you like literary fiction, you'll like this book. I struggle with literary fiction sometimes unless there are specific subtropes that I really like. Like, I love a multi-generational family story so much, and so like that umbrella of literary fiction I really enjoy. And I think this is also a case where there was just too many things going on. Like, there are too many motifs and themes. You're being beaten over the head with them, and it just felt like it was kind of being too obvious about itself. So yeah, I'm sorry. Again, we are now moving from disappointing territory to like, I want these hours of my life back. And number 3 on the worst books of the year list is Haunting Adeline by H.D. Carlton. This is another one. My name is in the title. I have a whole reading vlog where I read this and a couple other romances. I read some Ali Hazelwood's and I read a Katie Robert. And I really liked that video. I had a lot of fun with that. It was like a romance reading vlog where we had like dark romance and like fluffy contemporary romance. So if you want to watch that and get all of my thoughts, it's not like a spoiler video, but I share a little bit more about it. And I'm not going to give spoilers here because I don't want to spoil anything. Before you say, oh my gosh, you're giving it a low rating because like you just don't understand dark romance, and like, oh, like it's a dark romance, it has to be like X, Y, and Z. Like, I am not inherently bothered by the romance like between the two main characters. I didn't think it was bad. In fact, the best parts of this book are like the interactions between the two characters. And like, it is a super controversial, divisive book because, you know, and the author does lay this all out for you in a like note at the beginning. Like, there's like non-con and dub-con, like non-consent, dubious consent in the book, and like she lays that out. She's like, if you can't read this book, don't read this book. So like that part doesn't bother me. Like, she gives you that heads up. Dark romance is what it is. Like, I don't feel like getting into that right now. But the rest of this book, the writing is just, our main character, our main like male love interest is like a serial killer who like works for himself and like hunts down corrupt people in the government, right? Imagine like a 6th or 7th grader who doesn't really understand how the world works but has a very strong sense of justice decides to write like a vigilante character. Like, that's what this is. Violence and like SA of children that's just like there, I feel like, for this like shock value. Like it's not good. There are also like 3 plot lines going on and it's just too much. So it wasn't the stalker romance part that bothered me. It was mostly the writing and everything outside of that. Also, this book is like 500 pages long. Why? None of that was coherent and I apologize. Oh, the next book. This is another one I'm probably gonna get a lot of heat for. The second worst book that I read this year is Misery by Stephen King. I read this because my friend and I wanted to buddy read a book for like Halloween time, and she wanted to read a Stephen King, and I had Misery on my shelf and it was short. I'm not gonna sit here and tell you that it's horrible. The middle of this book is actually pretty solid. Like the beginning is so clunky and like what the hell is going on, like stream of consciousness, this like guy's on drugs. I mean, if you don't know what Misery is about, this famous author gets into a car accident and his #1 fan rescues him and then ends up like kind of like kidnapping him and holding him hostage in her house and forcing him to write a book in her like favorite series and like bring back a character that he killed off. So that's the plot of the book. And so like the middle part where he's like trying to escape, and you just like this whole chapter where you figure out a lot of her past, like Annie Wilkes's past, the main like person who has Paul Sheldon captive, I think is his name. That part was good. So like that middle chunk was really good, but the end, I really didn't like the end. I was not rooting for this man. My biggest issue with this book is about a white man who writes books about white people who's kidnapped by a crazy white lady, and he still finds a way to somehow be racist. Being on cocaine while you wrote this book does not justify that. Like, it just makes me so mad. And like, he does it in so many of his other books, like The Stand and the Dark Tower books, which I have up here. It's like he keeps referencing Africa and these rare birds from Africa, and there's this scene in the book within a book that he's writing where they go to Africa to like resurrect the memories of this person. It's so bad and cringy, and I'm just like, Stephen, how did you f this up? How did you mess this up so badly? I have a like soft place in my heart for the Dark Tower series because it's like the first fantasy series I ever read, and like I inherited the books from my dad and I like bonded with my dad and my uncle over reading them, but like I'm kind of embarrassed to have them here, to be honest. Okay, finally, I am not going to spend a lot of time on this. I already talked about this book in my mid-year freakout tag, so I'll have a link to that video above. But the top worst book that I read this year is The Book That Wouldn't Burn by Mark Lawrence. I'm just going to quickly recap my 2 biggest issues with this book. Number 1, this book is disgustingly fatphobic. It's so over the top. Then, like, the other biggest issue that I have with this book is this man. At the beginning of every chapter, there's like a little like quote from a book, an external, like a book that exists within the world or a writing within the world. But then this man quotes other books that he has written in real life. How narcissistic do you have to be to quote a book that you wrote in real life in a series that, to my knowledge, is not at all related? That by itself is just a pet peeve, like what the hell, Mark Lawrence? But like the other stuff on top of it was so freaking long. I would have DNF'd it if I wasn't reading it to get points in our staff summer reading competition, because you got X amount of points if you read a book with like book in the title, and I was already halfway through it and I was like, well, I'm not giving up now. I need these points, and I'm not going to read another book with book in the title, so here we go. This is happening, and you know, thank God I did, because it's on my worst books of the year. I just spent 20 minutes talking about 5 worst books that I read this year, and I have 20 more minutes to talk about the top 10. So I'm sorry, but we're gonna have to speed through this. I did rank these 1 to 10, but like, I love all these books. I recommend all of these books. Number 10, coming in at the 10th best book in the year that I read, is If Only You by Chloe Leese. This is the 6th book in the Bergman Brothers series by Chloe Leese. One of my favorite, actually no, my favorite romance author. I absolutely devoured it. It was such an emotional, like, look at these tabs. Such an emotional time. I had so much fun. I said this in my mid-year freak talk video, but this is one of the most unique romances that I've read ever, in terms of like how it subverts the traditional path of a romance. Like, you know, they have the catalyst of getting together, and then the middle part, and then the third act breakup. This really mixes it up in a way that I thought was amazing and has just such great representation. Ziggy, our female main character, is autistic, and Seb, the hockey player, our male lead interest, is dealing with like some trauma from childhood and like coming into himself as a person. There's also LGBTQ plus representation. Ziggy is bi and Seb is pan, I believe. Chloe Lease just knows how to write an absolutely heartwarming, hilarious, magical romance story, and I can't recommend her books enough. I had so much fun reading this, and I am genuinely going to shatter into a million pieces physically and emotionally when the 7th and final book comes out next year. Number 9 I do own, but I lent it out to somebody already. Literally as soon as I finished this book, I was like, I have to give this to people. I have to have other people read and experience this book. But number 9 is The Sentence by Louise Erdrich. I loved this book. I devoured it in like a day and a half. I read it for a book club. It was just absolutely fantastic. The way that Erdrich writes is just so compelling. I was absolutely sucked into the lives of these characters. And, you know, as I said, I don't read a lot of literary fiction or contemporary, what have you. But this book takes place during exactly 1 year, following our main character, Tookie, who is working in a bookstore. The bookstore is haunted by one of the frequent customers who has recently passed. It also takes place from November 2019 to November 2020, so we see a lot about the pandemic, and it was just like, it was so surreal reading a book that takes place in the early months of the pandemic and of quarantine, and just re-experiencing all that and experiencing that through the perspective of these main characters that are Indigenous people, and the murder of George Floyd, and how our main character, as an Indigenous woman who has been incarcerated, how she is navigating both of those things, and how her life and like her love interest, it absolutely punches you in the gut and like grabs your heart, and I loved it so much. Again, I devoured it. I can't recommend it enough. Obviously, if you are not in a place where you can read about the early stages of the pandemic and read about quarantine, I would put it off until you do feel like you are ready, if you feel like you are ready to read that. But it is just, it's so good. Also, Erdrich's writing is amazing, and I listened to the audiobook and she narrates it, and her narration was amazing. I can't wait to read more of her stuff. I own a couple of her books, but I have Love Medicine, I have Tracks, and I think I might have one other one. I can't see from here, but I definitely want to read more of her stuff in the new year. I had so much fun with it. Coming in at number 8, we have our first fantasy on the list, and that is Mammoths at the Gate by Nevo. This is the 4th book in the Singing Hills cycle, which is a series of novellas about a monk, a traveling monk who wanders about this fantastical version of China that's inspired by a lot of Chinese mythology and folklore. And our main character basically travels around the land and collects oral histories and stories, and these stories are stored at the abbey where this monk is from. And this book, our main character Chi is returning to their abbey, the Singing Hills Abbey, for the first time that we have seen in the series. So like the first 3 books take place while they're traveling, and then this is the first book where we get to experience their home, so to speak, and this magical place. They have birds that are kind of like not really birds, they're like persons but not humans. There's so much post-humanist thought in this book that I thought was really amazing, and throughout the whole series, honestly, that I really enjoyed. But just something about being at the abbey in this book, and it's such an emotional story because upon returning home, Claire Chi finds out that one of their mentors has passed away, and their family members are demanding the body of this renowned cleric. Honestly, it might be my favorite. I love the second one, When the Tigers Came Down the Mountain, a lot, but it might be my favorite in the series so far. It was so good. I loved it. The 5th one comes out next year. These are so good, but if you're gonna listen to these, I highly recommend the audio. The narrator of these books, I can't think of their name off the top of my head, but the narrator tells the stories in the most magical, like almost ASMR style, and it's so relaxing. But also I feel like because this story, like the plot of the story is about Claire Chi traveling throughout the countryside and collecting oral histories, it just feels so appropriate to read it as an audiobook. So if you like audio and you can do the audio format, I highly recommend it. Okay, coming in at number 7, we have another book that I don't own physically yet, unfortunately, but it is a romance, a new to me romance author that I tried this year, and it is Role Playing by Kathy Yardley. This book was fantastic. I had so much fun reading this book. It's so funny. Both of our main love interests are so endearing, and I love them so much, and I was rooting for them. It was so fantastic. But this is a 2023 release, which I think everything on this list except for The Sentence so far has been a 2023 release, which is crazy. Our main characters meet online, playing like a World of Warcraft-esque game. So our female love interest, Maggie, is a single mom whose son has just went off to college, and he is kind of like making a deal with her to try and get her to be a little more outgoing, and so she joins this like online gaming group, and she is very set in her ways as like being the crotchety lady who doesn't leave the house, doesn't like to leave the house, but her behavior makes everybody in the group think that she is like an 80-year-old woman. So our male love interest, Aiden, thinks that she's like 80, and she thinks that he is a college student because he is like going back to school. So like I guess the group is started on campus when people met each other. So it's just like the most hilarious, like you've got mail but like gaming, and then they meet in person and they realize they're the same age. He's like in his early 50s and she's in her late 40s, and they kind of like have this friendship that buds, and it turns a little bit into something else. So it was a really hilarious, like you've got male friends to lovers vibe. Maggie and Aiden are both just such fantastic leads, and personally I loved Aiden's storyline because he is a man who is in his 50s, and throughout the timeline of the book, by talking to Maggie and befriending Maggie, she is so supportive of him, and he discovers that he is both demisexual and bisexual, and like seeing that as an adult man who is in like his like middle age discovering these things about himself, and how like it just like clicks into place, and it just like transforms the way that he thinks about himself, the way that he like engages with his family. It's so emotional and beautiful, and their love story is just so sweet and darling. It was just so good, and I highly recommend it. I really want to read more from Kathy Yardley now. Okay, coming in at number 6, another one that I don't own that I need to buy is Magic for Liars by one of my favorite authors, Sarah Gailey. I don't know if it was last year or the year before that I started reading Sarah Gailey, but since I read Upright Women Wanted, which is the first book by them that I read, I have just been slowly chipping away at their backlist because I absolutely adore their writing and their brain. They come up with the most amazing, fantastic plots, and Magic for Liars, I think, is their debut. It's such a fun, magical mystery, I would say. And so our main character, I can't remember if she's a twin or if she just has a sister who is magical, but our main character does not have magic, but her sister is magical, and her sister teaches at this school for like magical children. And there has been a murder on the campus, and our main character is a PI, and so her sister reaches out to her and asks her to come to the campus to solve this murder. And so it's all about these sisters kind of confronting a lot of the tension of one of them being magical and one of them not being magical, and like how that really shaped how they grew up and their relationship with each other as adults and when they were younger. And also just like the magical mystery plot line. It was so interesting and I really enjoyed it. I had so much fun reading this book, and I think about it all the time. I read it months and months ago. Sarah Gailey is amazing, and I'm always going to read anything that they come out with. But if you like fantasy or mystery, I think this is such a fun merging of the two genres, and I cannot recommend it enough. Okay, the angle might be slightly different. I just got off the phone with my brother and I have like 15 minutes to wrap this up. So we're about halfway through. We're good. We're in the top 5, okay? Coming in at number 5 for my best books of 2023 is Bunny by Mona Awad. This book, I had heard a lot about this book going into it, and I was a little intimidated. I actually had read like the first 90 pages of this book like 2 years ago, and I ended up putting it down just because I wasn't in the headspace for it. And I've heard so many fantastic things about this book, but I've also heard that it is like a book that you have to read multiple times to understand it. And I am very much like, ugh, I don't want to do that. I want to get it on the first go. But then like I also love rereading and analyzing, so I approached this as I would a book that I was reading for a class. And at the beginning of the book, I wrote down my theories and what page I started thinking that would be my theory for what's actually going on. Because this book is very much, it's very trippy. It's like dark academia. We're following our main character who goes to like an Ivy League school of sorts, and she's in an MFA program, and there's a lot of weird stuff that's going on. But I love all of the different themes that Mona Awad explores in this book, from loneliness to like this deep dive and simultaneously criticizing and discussing the merits of an MFA program. As someone who did get an MFA, Mona Awad did get an MFA, not myself, but Mona Awad did. And so like being able to both criticize it and write an entire book about this experience from the perspective of this woman who is very lost. I don't want to like say anything that would spoil the book because it is truly amazing, but what I will say is that if you are like frustrated or intimidated by this book because of reviews that you've heard about it where it's like, well, you're not gonna get this the first time around, I would just say like, I think approaching it from that like more critical lens really helped me enjoy the book as I was reading it, because I was like, ooh, like this is my first theory and like what made me think that, and like tracking that throughout the book and then like shifting my theory partway through the book. This made me feel like I wanted so desperately to walk into a university classroom and talk about this for hours with my like fellow students. I don't think I've read a book quite like it since graduating from undergraduate as an English literature major, so it really just, it spoke to my heart in that way. So like maybe that's my like nerdy English annotator bias coming through. I could definitely see how people would not like this book, so it's got a lot going on in such a good way, and every single thing that Mona Awad is doing is done well, and they all the disparate parts come together in such a way that I think is really fantastic, and I just loved it. So yeah, this was amazing. I also love this cover. Okay, coming in at number 4 on my best books of the year is Fevered Star by Rebecca Roanhorse. Okay, so come on this journey with me really quickly. In 2020, I read Black Sun as part of a 24-hour reading vlog video. So I loved it. It was fantastic, but I definitely read it too fast because it was the first book in a fantasy series. And so I knew that I wanted to reread it before I read the second book, Fevered Star. So in November or October, I can't remember which month, I reread Black Sun. And as soon as I finished that book, I thought I absolutely robbed this book because it made it into my honorable mentions, I think, of 2020, but it was not in my top 5 of 2020, and it absolutely should have been. This is quickly becoming one of my favorite fantasy series of all time. I love all of the perspectives. I love the world building, the politics, and like how like visceral and like violent and nitty and gritty and like backhanded, two-faced all the political games are. There's one of my favorite characters of all time and fictional crushes, Shala. If you know, you know. Anyway, so I reread Black Sun and annotated it, and then immediately after it went out and bought Fevered Star and read it and annotated that one as well. And let me tell you, this series, it's so good. You have to read it. If you like fantasy, this is a staple of the fantasy genre, all right? It is high fantasy, but I think that the way Rebecca Roanhorse writes her books, they propel you through the narrative. I read them so quickly, not because it's like simple or easy to grasp, but because they are absolutely impossible to put down. Like when I reread it, I still read it so fast. Like even though I was annotating and like highlighting and things, it's just, the story is amazing. The world is so interesting. It's inspired by pre-Columbian civilizations. There's like creatures that the clans ride, and there's magics, and there's a lot more exploration of the magic systems and all of the different types of magic in the world in this book, which I really, really appreciated. The end to this book especially, I cannot tell you how much I love what Rebecca Roanhorse does in the end of this book, because I feel like she takes the typical trajectory of a fantasy story like this and kind of turns it on its head with what she does at the end of this book, and like the last confrontation in this, so to speak. I just, like, when I put it down, I was like, that was brilliant. So many things happen in this book, and like characters that didn't meet in the first one meet each other, and it was so good. I love it so much. It is amazing. You have to read it. Okay, number 3, I am kind of shocked that I loved this book this much. Not because it's not good or I didn't expect it to be good, but because it's a YA. And I have been struggling with YA in recent years, just because I feel like I am slowly growing out of it as a genre. Not necessarily, but like I have trouble with it. This book absolutely stole my heart, and just like I can't stop thinking about it, and that is Gwen and Art Are Not in Love by Lex Croucher. This is the most adorable, hilarious, creative, and fun book I have read in forever. Like, it is so fun. Our main characters, Gwen and Art, are betrothed from like the time that they're little babies, and then like at the beginning of the book, it's kind of time for them to start, you know, courting each other, so to speak. But they very quickly find out that Arthur likes boys, and she catches him kissing a boy, and then Art finds out that she has a crush on a lady knight. So they kind of team up to help each other's little queer love stories flourish, and it's really funny. Like, when I tell you I laughed out loud so many times while reading this book. Also, all of our main characters, we see so much emotional growth from them throughout the book. It's got like all the fun parts of a fantasy novel and all of the best parts of a romance novel, and just like smush them together. I was absolutely smitten reading this book. Like, it just, like, I was blushing and laughing and rooting for the characters the whole time, and it was just so fun, and I highly, highly, highly recommend it. It was amazing. I cannot wait to read more from Lex Croucher in 2024. I'm definitely going to prioritize reading their backlist. The next two, the top 2 books, are probably going to be a surprise to no one, because I will not stop talking about either of these books. The first one in particular, but coming in at number 2 in my best books of the year, to literally no one's surprise, is Tress of the Emerald Sea by Brandon Sanderson. I got the like Kickstarter editions with my dad. We like split the cost so that we could both read them, and I get to keep them as a gift to me, because this is the most beautiful book I've ever seen in my entire life. I love it. Okay, it's gorgeous. This is such a fun, creative, amazing fantasy story. It's got like pirate-esque vibes, and there's an adventure. It's, I believe, inspired by The Princess Bride. It's so good. And if you have been wanting to get into Brandon Sanderson and you're intimidated by his super long books and his really long series, this is a standalone, and it's a Cosmere novel. So you get to introduce yourself to Brandon Sanderson's writing without committing to a series, and you introduce yourself to this larger world that a lot of his books take place in, the Cosmere, and the magic system and like the world building, so creative, very unique, as is Brandon Sanderson's style. It's just so good, and I absolutely loved it. And that's all I'm gonna say about it, because I feel like this is very popular. This is probably gonna be on a lot of people's best of the year list, or it should be if they read it. But anyway, last but absolutely certainly not least, I talked about this in my mid-year wrap-up, so literally no one is gonna be surprised, but Children of Gods and Fighting Men by Shauna Lawless, where, if you have not read this book, I need you to immediately purchase it and read it as soon as you possibly can. This is an Irish mythological historical fantasy, and it is fantastic. If you're a fan of Game of Thrones, but you want more of that like female rage, you want like Daenerys in season 8, you want like Cersei just being herself, but you also want like Irish vibes, you gotta read it. I will say this book is obviously very tailored to my personal taste as somebody who loves Irish mythology and studied Irish language and has read a lot of Irish literature. Like, this is for me, okay? As a fantasy lover and an Irish lady, like, this book was written for me, I believe. I don't know how Shauna Wallace saw into my brain and my desires for a book. In saying that, like, I realize maybe not everybody will connect to it the way that I do, but the writing is fantastic. It's such a good story. It's a trilogy, I think. I will not stop talking about this book. I talked about this to my coworkers so much they're probably ready to kill me. I yell at my dad to read this book at least once a week, and he still hasn't, so everybody in the comments, yell at my dad and I'll show them to him. I did a tandem read with like audio and physically reading. The audiobook is really good, especially if you aren't sure how to pronounce a lot of the very Irish names in this book. The audiobook is amazing, so do it. Okay, that is the end of this video. I'm sweating because it's 50 degrees in December. I have to go celebrate Christmas with my family, so I'm gonna go do that. But thank you so much for watching this video. I hope that you enjoyed it. Please, please, please let me know your best and worst, or just your best, whatever you want to throw in the comments down below. Those are like my favorite videos to watch, so if you have a best and worst video, tag them. Thank you so much for stopping by my channel. It means the world to me. I love you all. Don't forget to like, comment, and subscribe if that's your jam, and I'll see you in my next video. Happy reading, happy writing, and happy living. And also happy holidays from Sandy Claus. Peace out.